Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I have got my stupendous, marvelous, I can't think of any other way to really introduce the Matt Rossi that would really coincide with what our topic is going to be today that doesn't sound weird. So, hi, Matt.
I'm going to say I'm the Wookiee with a life debt to you. You're Han Solo, I'm Chewbacca, that kind of thing.
We can go with that. And that should give you a little bit of an idea, but maybe not for why you think where we're going to be going in this episode. But if you have topics or questions you want us to cover, be sure to send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open to everybody. And we also have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel set aside for our lovely patrons who help us keep the lights on. So this is going to be a two-parter, and we're going to start with the first one, but both come from our friend Verdigree, who has sent us some thought-provoking items. First, this was a possible topic for Lore Watch. Surprise, we're doing it. The parallels between the Kirin Tor and the Jedi Order, and perhaps generally Star Wars and Warcraft. So Verdigree plays a Forsaken Mage on Dalaran server, irony. When they played through the Fall of Dalaran, despite everything they'd been through there, including their character being named Archmage by Khadgar, its loss didn't hit them as hard as they'd expect. Dalaran the city never felt that homey. Then in the Fate of Kirin Tor quest, they didn't really get why they came to the decision not to rebuild the city, and ultimately was kind of disengaged until several months ago. They started listening to A More Civilized Age, a Star Wars podcast, and watching The Clone Wars. And as the critiques of the Jedi kept piling on, eventually it hit me. The structure and decline of the Jedi Order felt incredibly familiar. Everything clicked. I could suddenly see so many parallels. As you see the Jedi become more militaristic, it suddenly struck me how arrogant it was to treat your own city, full of lots of people who didn't sign up to be soldiers, as a battleship, and sail it directly into the heart of danger over and over despite it not being one. They used it like Arthas used Nax Ramis, but it was never a fortress. The Kirin Tor are very narrow-minded on what is acceptable, and once you step outside their limited rules, you can get banished, like the Jedi, forbidding knowledge and research into the dark side, because a lot of Jedi to fall far because they have no clue what they're doing and too afraid of the consequences to ask for help. We had all kinds of people striking out of their own, Kel'Thuzad, Egwene, Medivh, Anakin, Count Dooku, to dire consequences. Though Dalaran accepted all the classes' presence out of necessity, did they ever truly respect them or their knowledge? So this is interesting, and it's something that I thought was, I like it. I like the comparison because I do think it is pretty apt. And it is interesting that the characterization of Dalaran up into the current content really has been more militaristic than I think that order has ever really been, or was ever intended to be. And so you get this not necessarily a self-discovery, but a very introspective look from Khadgar and the others of what does Dalaran actually mean? What is it supposed to be? What is the Kirin Tor supposed to be? And Matt and I had talked about that previously, but it's a fascinating question that is a good way to correct what Dalaran and what the Kirin Tor had become, which, as you pointed out, Verdigree, way too militaristic, way too willing to throw themselves into every danger. And that was also sort of a pendulum reaction from them not being involved in the first place when things went sideways. So I'll turn it over to Matt, and he can kind of go where he wants with this one. But I just think it's an interesting and very apt comparison with the Jedi Order, who followed much the same trajectory.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of places where you could make an argument about them being similar. To a degree, this is just what happens when somebody creates a order that considers themselves the gatekeepers of certain knowledge. That just happens in you see that in the Dragon Reborn stuff, the Wheel of Time. You see that in in what we just talked about, Star Wars. You see that in the original Lensman books. You see it all over the place. It is a pretty common trope. That being said, one of the things that comes to mind to me is the fact that the foundation of the Kirin Tor was originally to clean up the mess that teaching magic to a race that was as short-lived and widespread as humanity caused.
Were they originally the Senate of Dalaran, the Mage's Senate, something like that?
No. The original Kirin Tor, the very first. I mean, they took on that role. Absolutely, they did. In a way, Dragon Age is a good one to look at here in terms of the Kirin Tor, because it's very similar in that the original magisters of Tevinter were mages because almost everybody in Tevinter was a mage. It wasn't intended to be mages rule. It's just that the rulership were also mages. And then after a while, it got conflated. Originally, the Kirin Tor was an order of humans and elves and anybody else that could do magic. There were gnomes in there. And the reason that they were created was Dalaran was a human kingdom.
Yeah, it was one of the seven, right?
One of the seven. It wasn't originally ruled by the Kirin Tor at all. It was ruled by the people of Dalaran. They had their own rule. There was even a royal family. But we don't know much about them because very quickly the problem with having mages, because keep in mind, Arador came to power, and the first thing he did when the elves demanded his help was say, you're going to help me train 100 mages. You're going to give 100 human beings magical powers. The elves agreed to this because they thought, well, it takes forever to learn how to be a magician. Tapping magical power, the arcane, takes forever. These short-lived are barely going to, boom, they're blowing stuff up. How did they do that fast? It took out, because humans, being short-lived, take shortcuts. They do things that the elves wouldn't do because the elves, A, live longer, and B, they have that memory of that time all those demons came and almost killed them all. Keep in mind that the elf that Arator dealt with, and this was 3,000 years ago, was Anasterian, Sunstrider, the child of Dathrimar, who came from Kalimdor after the Sundering. They knew about demon summoning. They knew about mages summoning the Burning Legion or just attracting their attention. They didn't want to do that. But the humans did not care, and thus all sorts of demons started showing up. This led to the formation of the Kirin Tor. The Kirin Tor originally were just supposed to be cops. They were magic cops. Guardians. Sound familiar? Yeah, the Jedi. It's very similar. But while the Jedi become militarized, initially the Kirin Tor became governmentalized. They provided rule in Dalaran because how was anyone going to tell them not to? First off, they were all very powerful mages. Secondly, they had to have broad sweeping powers in order to stop demons and people who would summon demons. And third, once you accumulate that much magical power in one organization that is seated in one city, that city ceases to be a city and becomes their private fiefdom. And so over the course of things going, they continued to do this, and it occurred to them, well, heck, we can't really stop these demons by ourselves. We're going to invest a chunk of our power in one person. And that's where the Guardian was originally created. And we've got a chain of them leading down until we finally hit Medivh, who's the last one. That decision to do that made that the Kirin Tor turned all of their attention to ruling Dalaran as a platform for the Guardian. The Guardian, the first Guardian to ever have their own tower in the middle of nowhere was Medivh.
Mm-hmm.
Up until Medivh's mom, Egwene, all the Guardians, Aloth on, they lived in Dalaran. You actually become the Archmage, you get his home base. The original Guardian's home base was right there in Dalaran. And that's what Dalaran was for centuries. When it got destroyed by the Burning Legion in, I want to say the Third War. Yeah, the Third War. That's when they go militaristic. And what does that remind us of? The Jedi turned towards militarism because of the Clone Wars. In both cases, you've got an order that really isn't suited to the role of soldiers. These are cops. The Jedi were cops. They were preservers of order. They were not, troops. The Republic had an army. It didn't need Jedi, or at least for a long time, it didn't seem to need Jedi to defend itself. There were notable exceptions, like that time that the Sith came and blew up Taris, and that's the result of the Star Wars games and so forth. But overall, the Jedi never served as an army until the Clone Wars, and in fact, the entire Clone Wars was just so Palpatine could get the Jedi put into a role as soldiers, because he knew they weren't suited to it. They weren't intended to be soldiers. In the same way that Kirin Tor was never intended to rule Dalaran. And the fact that they turned into Dalaran's rulers was the first step on their path to being out of what they should be doing. They're supposed to be figuring out how to protect Azeroth from runaway magic. And sometimes they try to do that, like in not Wrath, Legion. And Legion, that's what they're doing. They take Kultiris. They take Dalaran. Sorry, Kultiris. They didn't take Kultiris anywhere. They take Dalaran to Northrend because it's the only place they can put it to keep it floating, with the ley lines getting destroyed like they are. They need to confront the Blue Dragonflight. But at the same time, you're absolutely right that the city is full of people who are just people. And sometimes it's hard for us to get that, because by necessity, the city is only a couple of blocks wide. When we go to it in game, it's only a couple blocks wide. But the real Dalaran in the game's lore it's a city.
It's a full city, like not as big as Stormwind, but a city, like a big city.
Yeah, it's up there. I mean, it's not as big as Stormwind, but it's big. And yeah, so he's absolutely right about that. And to a degree, that's one of the things that's a real sign of Dalaran's degradation, is that when it gets destroyed because of its arrogance. Ultimately, the fact that book was there in Dalaran is because they were like, only we could possibly understand this. None of you should be allowed to look at this book. The one that the orcs used to summon demons and create Death Knights. When they came and stole that book from Dalaran in the Second War, that basically opened the place up. Everyone knew that that's where the research on it was. That's why one of the reasons that Kel'Thuzad knew that it was there. A lot of Kel'Thuzad's turn to lichdom was him discovering those secrets. And the rest of the Kirin Tor, like, no, you can't study this. You must, it's evil and you can't look at it. And obviously, they have a massive anti-warlock bias. I mean, clearly they always have. And all these things combine into the Kirin Tor always believing that they are right. And I think that is it's a good parallel with the Jedi Order. The difference being, of course, that the Kirin Tor doesn't have a singular enemy like Palpatine. They have so many different enemies that who can keep track of all of them? They can't even keep track of whether or not a Kirin Tor Archmage is dead or not.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the whole thing that started the war within. Like, but getting to some of the roots of the question, like, do they consider what they're doing when they jump their city into these dangerous situations?
No, I don't think they do.
They don't. I think Matt hit the nail on the head with the hubris portion, right?
Yeah, they totally. If it's a magical problem, Dalaran is not. They don't think of Dalaran as Dalaran. They think of Dalaran as the Kirin Tor.
Yeah.
The city is just there for them to have a thing to be in charge of. And the fact that it's an actual city with people living in it, I mean, they almost got them all killed at the end of during the Third War. Then they hid the place in a bubble for like a decade. And then they start dragging them off to every other place in the world. It's like, why is your first response when something bad is happening to move Dalaran? Like, just leave Dalaran where it is. They wanted to bring it to in game. They didn't. There wasn't never mentioned in lore, but the designers wanted to bring Dalaran to Orgrimmar.
Yeah.
during the Siege of Orgrimmar. I'm like, I have a headcanon, just like, they were like, let's bring the city to Dalaran. And like somebody in the city was like, no, look, no. We don't have any reason to bring the city there. It's not like you can do anything with the city over Orgrimmar that you couldn't just do. So just go do it. You don't have to bring us there. I got kids here. It's like crazy. He's completely right. When I read that line from him, I was like, he's totally got a point, man. If I lived in Dalaran, I would be like, don't rebuild it. I'm not coming back. Nope, you got me back twice now. No, I'm gonna go. I'm moving I'm moving to Gilneas. They seem like they got their stuff in order. Didn't Gilneas just get destroyed by the Horde? I said I'm moving to Gilneas. It's back now. It's good.
Yeah, well, at least Gilneas stayed where it was. Like,
Yeah.
and you raise a good point, and you raise an interesting point that I think is also a series of parallel, because one of the questions that often gets asked in like Star Wars lore is, well, especially with like the newer trilogies and the world beyond, is why wasn't the Jedi Order reestablished? And the answer was it kind of was, but not in the way that it was before. It was much more decentralized. It was much more specialized. It was much more about going back to the roots of what they were, as opposed to, one massive city where, everybody went and trained and in the main temple. It became
It's easy to
smaller
forget.
temples.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that the Jedi Temple, as we see it in the prequel trilogy, and as we see it in other things, the Jedi Temple is like the size of Manhattan Island.
Yeah.
It's enormous.
It's a city in and of itself.
Yeah, the fact that it doesn't, like, people act like it's a building in a city, is that the planet it's on is completely covered by a city. Like, there's one city on Coruscant. It is gigantic. That's the only reason you think of the Jedi Temple as a structure and not a temple, and not a city. They lived in an enclave where, from the time that they were Jedi, the time that someone said, "Oh, this kid's got the Force," up until death in some cases, they lived in complete isolation from the world around them, except for when they had to go on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that lived in that city never went anywhere, and the ones that wandered from place to place and never really settled down, never stopped. And it's not like you couldn't leave. Like, Dooku left, and he didn't leave in disgrace. He just said, "I'm done. I can't. You guys are crazy," and left. You could leave. Technically speaking, he was supposed to never use the Force again, but very clearly, how do you do that?
Also,
how do you tell
I was gonna say also, like, that the Ahsoka is another prime example of somebody who, before, like, while things were going bad, but like she was already on the outs, she was already ready to leave.
Yeah, and for the same reason, she's like, we've lost our way. Oddly enough, her and Dooku were very similar in that way. They were both like, we've lost our way. We're doing things that don't make sense. I know not a lot of people liked the Acolyte,
Mm-hmm.
but I liked the point it was making.
The Grey Jedi.
Was that the Jedi Order were like, they weren't, calling them corrupt isn't accurate, because they weren't corrupt. It's not like anyone was paying them.
Misguided.
It's not like they were doing things. I think they had just fossilized.
Mm.
Like, it goes back to, like,
becomes so sedimentary because they nothing really changed or forced them to change. Yeah, I could see that.
Because from the time that they finally, quote unquote, won the War of Darkness against the Sith, remember that one time that the Jedi and the Sith faced each other across, the galaxy, and each had hundreds, if not thousands, of adherents.
Yeah.
And that only ended when the Sith essentially destroyed themselves trying to destroy the Jedi at the end of the War of Light and Darkness, when you get the rule of two and the Sith become reclusive for the next 1,000 or so years. None of the Jedi that you meet in the original trilogy, not in the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, none of those people ever saw a Sith before. Like,
they were
the
rumors.
The Yoda would have never seen one, because Yoda was born about 150 years after the War of Light and Darkness. So he would never have actually seen or experienced the Sith. He wouldn't know how to deal with that level of dedicated Force, dark side of the Force adherence. It was something he did not have experience with. None of them did. And he even says, as things tip out of the balance, we can't see or perceive as much. The Jedi's senses were getting dulled by the disorder in the Force. it's very similar to the way that Kirin Tor, as the wars come, as the Horde invades, they're less and less effective because the last time they were that, they'd already had to deal with like an invasion of demons that was so bad that the Guardian decided, I can't trust you people anymore. You're not worth partnering with. You're not trustworthy. I have to fight like Sargeras, and I have to do it with you holding me back. So no, I don't trust you. I'm not letting you have this power back. I'm not letting you decide who gets it next because you can't be trusted. I'm going to do it myself. And obviously part of that was Sargeras influencing her, but nevertheless, it's a similar thing. It's the organization isn't evil. It doesn't want to serve the fell black, the Burning Legion. It's just moribund. They cannot see past their arrogance.
Yeah, and I think you're raising an interesting point because there's one thing, and not to skip topics a little bit, but I feel is tangentially related. One of the things that I always liked from the Star Wars side of things was the depiction of gray Jedi. And gray Jedi it's something that it means two things, right? It's Jedi that have essentially walked away from the Jedi High Council. They don't want to be under the structure of the Jedi High Council because they feel that, like Matt has pointed out, it's fossilized. It's too rigid, or it's too whatever. And it doesn't allow for things like, again, the whole having a family thing. Like that was a major like thing for some folks. It also means that these are people that, or was a term used to describe people that studied the dark side but didn't fall to it, didn't fully succumb to the seductive power of it. And in a lot of ways, this kind of looks like, and I'm going to throw this out there, what may be the origin of warlocks in WoW at some point, right? You have these incredible magic users that start plumbing the depths of, essentially in this case, demonic knowledge, or not necessarily demonic knowledge, extraplanar knowledge, we'll call it, because we now know that demons aren't necessarily demons. They're extraplanar beings, essentially, from various worlds and realities. But we don't know who the first warlock is, right? It could have been somebody who walked away from the rigid structure of the Kirin Tor and said, I don't want to do this. And we know, like you said, Kel'Thuzad. Kel'Thuzad walked away because he wanted to plumb the depths. Now, he did ultimately succumb to the dark magic, but not in the way that people think. Like, he was amoral. Like, he didn't care what he had to do to get where he wanted. He wanted the power, but he wasn't, at the time, mustache twirling world domination. That came later. Like that came after being forced to serve the Lich King, right? So like even he started out as sort of in that gray area where it's like, I want to study these things. I want to.
Yeah, Kel'Thuzad's a really good example of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So like it's a fascinating way to look back at the Kirin Tor and see exactly what the parallels with the Jedi Council really are. And there is a lot of similarities. It's a lot of things that, due to stagnation, due to hubris, due to lack of outside thinking, and I'll be honest, lack of creativity, they couldn't see their nose for their face, right?
Yeah. Like one of my favorite examples of a gray Jedi is Jolee Bindo.
Yes.
From Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah.
And Jolee's whole thing is that he fell in love.
Yeah.
And the Jedi Council has been teaching at this point. I think Knights of the Old Republic is like 6,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. And the Jedi Council is like, strong emotion is bad. You can't let yourself feel strong emotion. You have to be balanced. You have to always be balanced between all these things. And Jolie's like, no, love will save you, not damn you. Yes, love can lead to pain, and pain can lead to the dark side, but we keep making this mistake of thinking that the dark side of the Force isn't part of the Force. It is. It's the Force.
Almost like a light and dark cycle.
Yeah, you want to balance the Force. You have to balance it in yourself, not in the universe. Loving people, no, that's not wrong. Anger, no, anger isn't wrong. What's wrong is you. What you do with it is what's wrong. The suffering caused by the dark side is the suffering of people who do not know when to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, again, another show that people didn't like as much, but the Obi-Wan show is a really good example of this because Obi-Wan can't beat Vader.
Also, Obi-Wan is a
Yeah.
really good example, as is Qui-Gon, as far as I'm concerned, of
Yeah.
Grey Jedi.
By the end, Obi-Wan's a Grey Jedi, absolutely. But during the entire episode, his fear and his pain over what happened means he can't successfully fight Darth Vader. For like multiple episodes, he's running from him. Finally, he's like, no, put me down on that planet. Put me down right there on that ball of rock and get out of here. He won't follow you. You know, he'll only, if he knows I'm there, he will not break off and chase you. So get this girl home. I'm going to stay and fight. And you watch them fight, and for whatever you say about the show, that last fight's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that's great about it is Darth Vader is slapping him around for most of it. Like he's trying his best, and he actually is. He's conquered his fears in a lot of ways, and he is using the Force effectively again. But he can't. You know, Vader is like an engine of destruction. He's lost some of his ability because he got injured so badly, but his rage is so strong. Obi-Wan just can't stop him, and he gets buried alive. But when he gets buried alive, this is the moment where it's like you could have imagined Jolie Bindo showing up to tell him, "No, moron, stop trying not to feel, because that's not gonna help you. You need to feel." That little girl and that little boy you owe them for everything they lost, for the mother that they lost, for the father that they lost. You owe them, and you have to get up. And that's when he shows, then he can use the Force to a level that even Vader can't stop, because Vader can only draw on rage. If Vader looked into his heart and saw how much he still loves his son, his daughter, how much he really does want to be good, he wants to be a hero, and he's twisted up in his own rage. If he could put that aside, he'd be strong enough to kill Palpatine in a second. It's the tragedy of Darth Vader is that he can never let go of his hate. And by letting go of his hate, he could beat Palpatine in a second. But he can't. He can't until somebody comes along and makes him. And that's his tragedy. Obi-Wan that's the moment where he becomes a Grey Jedi fully, is the moment he embraces that loving these children, loving people, wanting to protect them. It's not a sin. It's not a curse. It's not going to destroy you. It'll save you. And the Kirin Tor, their whole thing with the Guardians is very similar in that they never learned that it wasn't about just giving one guy all the magic power you can. It was about having everybody together. Like if they had actually ruled Dalaran with concern for Dalaran, if they had stayed neutral in political conflicts and always brought everyone together to fight like demons and monsters as they invade, then they would have been fulfilling their function. But they didn't, and that's why they fell. And I think to a certain degree, it is good that they're not just going to rebuild Dalaran again. I think they should actually rebuild Dalaran. They should go back to where it was and build a city there and let people live there, and they don't go there anymore.
Yeah, but I think that's one of those things where probably not going to happen because the reputation at this point, going back to the whole
the city wants to live in the flying blow up city. No thanks.
Yeah, the city not being a fortress, I think, is a really interesting thing because they tried, right? They tried to reinforce it with magical wards and multiple times they've done this. Even in the original destruction of Dalaran, it was wards that mages were maintaining that were trying to keep out the invading force and everything else. And all it took was some of them just being taken out essentially to weaken the wards enough to keep putting pressure on it.
You'll notice who does this too. Soldiers.
Yes.
I mean, they're undead soldiers.
But they're still soldiers.
But they're soldiers. Because they never once stopped and asked anybody with any military experience, how would you defend this city?
Well, I mean, case in point, there are no walls.
Nope.
It's supposed to be the capital of one of the 7 human kingdoms, and it has no walls. It is literally, if you look at the images of the essentially pre-destruction Dalaran, I
Yeah,
think
just
it
go watch
was
the cinematic where he destroys it even.
the destruction of Dalaran cinematic. It looks like a unwalled version of Minas Tirith. Like it just, it has aqueducts, it has roads, it has plenty of roads encircling it, has layers, but nothing to keep it out. And people are like, oh well, there's rivers between it. That's not a defense. Even
No,
people,
you drop a board across that, and it's
or boats, or the fact that you live in a magical land where things can fly. Like there was no practical defense. Everything was all in on that magic. And in a lot of ways, that parallels with the Jedi Temple as well. The Jedi Temple kind of eschewed physical defenses in place of, we have Jedi, we're fine. And I think that's kind of interesting because like there's this whole thing where like Jedis don't use blasters, it's not civilized. And then you have Jedi who are like, whatever, it's a gun, I'm gonna fight, I don't care, whatever weapon's a good weapon. They eschewed all of that. They didn't have defense anything really. They had maybe force fields here and there, but by and large, they never viewed their temple as a position that needed to be defended, because that hubris of, well, the Jedi will,
who would dare attack the Jedi?
Yeah. And it's the same thing with Dalaran. When you have the Archmage who lives there, the city of the Guardian, essentially, because even after the Guardian went and moved to its tower, after Egwene took her ball and went home, they still have that mentality. They still treating the city like that. Like who would dare breach our walls when we're the city of the Guardian? Guardian don't live there no more. Not only that, but like, again, a dude with a rock versus you with a lightning bolt. Sometimes that dude with a rock's going to get real lucky, right?
Yeah, or just for the fact that he knows how to kill people.
Yeah, that literally soldiers train for this stuff.
You know how to do big magical things, which are very nice and very important, but we can't keep treating mages like siege weapons.
Yeah,
mages are people.
Yeah.
It's like you can bring them to battle, but then what happens? It took this guy like his entire life, all 50 years of it, to get this good at magic. And now a guy with a stick got lucky and killed him after he set some stuff on fire.
Which I think is really interesting, because there's a kind of a random aside. I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of like, especially because of the more recent cinematic, when you start looking at what would that have been if the mages had not had that hubris and had we gone like the old Republic style, where you had different classifications of Jedi, where you had guardians and knights and paladins.
Yeah,
right?
consulars and guardians, and I forget what the third one was. There's like an actual militant one.
Yeah, no, they literally
Sentinels.
They're sentinels, but sentinels were literally the equivalent of a paladin, right? Like they were militaristically trained in combat, trained in practical combat.
Didn't they wear armor? Like they actually had armor.
They actually wore heavy armor. They were essentially just like you would have paladins who can wield the light. They're warriors that can wield the light. You could have had that with mages, and like I'm surprised that we didn't, and that they never considered it. But again, it goes to that hubris. But like even elves realized that this is a problem, and so spellbreakers exist. They are militaristic elves, blood elven warriors trained to destroy spellcasters by disrupting and controlling and contorting the magical energies of their opponents. They are mages trained in warfare. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. The spellbreakers are great for that. They're not just useful against people doing magic. They're great anti-demon fighters. They're great against undead. They're great against anything that's dependent upon mystical abilities, because they can deny them that. And they do it in a way that doesn't endanger them as much, because they are trained fighters.
Yes.
They have big shields.
Tower
they
shields.
Can do they have formations that they take. They understand how to deal with magic. And there's the problem with like the idea of the city is ruled by guys who literally spend all of their time studying one field.
They ponder their orbs, man. Let's be honest.
Yeah, like and it is the same problem with the Jedi. Like one of the greatest things to my mind in the original not again, I keep saying the original trilogy, but I mean the sequel trilogy, is when they show a Jedi up against, say, a Mandalorian bounty hunter,
Mm-hmm.
and you see, like the Jedi is very skilled, yes, absolutely, but they're not invincible.
No.
They can be beaten.
Well,
You can
the whole
beat the
origin of the
Jedi.
dark saber and why it was sat on Mandalore, right?
Yeah, Mandalorians, and that goes back. What I loved about that is that they found a way to incorporate it into so many sources. The idea that the Mandalorians went from an actual race to a creed because the Jedi fought them about 6,500 years ago, and that's the whole deal with Revan and all that stuff. But the fact that you get these things developing where they're like people other than the Jedi understand the Force.
Mm-hmm.
People other than the Jedi have actually come up with countermeasures. And part of the problem for the Jedi is that they don't stop and learn them.
Yeah.
Like, you should know how to do this too, because the Sith are just using Jedi magic. At the heart of it, they're using Jedi power. They're just using it differently, but they're still doing it.
And the
If
interesting
you
thing
knew how to do this stuff, you could beat them.
And the interesting thing is, like, in the lore of Star Wars, it's in the novels that are largely been relegated to legend status. But you had, why can I think of his name now? Samuel Jackson's character.
Oh, Mace Windu, Vapad. You're going to talk
Yeah,
about Vapad.
yeah. Mace Windu was literally the only one who was like, no, practical application, right? Like he sat and studied not just different forms of lightsaber warfare, but warfare. Like when the Clone War broke out, he knew what was going on. He knew how to deal with a bunch of this stuff, but nobody listened to him, right? Like it was a stark contrast to that philosophy. And again, where I would push Mace Windu maybe slowly more towards that neutral gray side than really the doctrine of, pure Jedi Council. But like he had the intention at the heart. But go ahead.
I think you're right about Mace being more gray side in practice. Mace's problem was his tremendous respect for Yoda.
Yes.
And I'm going to just do this now. Yoda is the reason everything fell apart. Yoda he's not that he was too old, although he was very old.
He's too rigid.
He'd been through, yeah, absolutely. Too rigid is absolutely a good way to put it. Yoda had lived long enough that he had been around for like 900 years when we get to the original series. In the Clone Wars, he's a little younger, but he's been around so long, and he never had to face anything like a Sith in that whole time. So his approach to the Force, while a perfectly good one, there's nothing wrong with his approach to the Force, it just doesn't apply to everybody. And it's the reason you look at the big things we lose because of Yoda. Count Dooku leaves the Order. And that's a big deal because Count Dooku was amazing in his prime.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was around the galaxy doing good things, stopping people. He was Qui-Gon Jinn's mentor.
Yeah, he was just short of being declared master, right?
Yeah, he wasn't. He was a Jedi master. He was on the council.
The council status.
Yeah, he almost got on the council, and the only reason he didn't was because he started realizing that stuff is going wrong. We're not doing the right things, and this is during the whole Acolyte era. Him and Mace Windu had arguments about this because Windu was like, look, we have to trust Master Yoda's wisdom. And he'd be like, no, we don't. No one person needs to be trusted over the Force. It's the Force we should be trusting. And that's something Qui-Gon internalized, but Qui-Gon didn't have the anger the way that Dooku did. He wasn't mad at them. And that's because he understood, he had compassion for them. And that's why Qui-Gon would have, if Qui-Gon had lived, we would not have had, the Jedi Order would have reformed. It wouldn't have fallen.
Yeah, I also think that Dooku could have been redeemed, and the only reason I say that is because if you look at it, he did not fully succumb to the dark side.
No, he doesn't. When he's fighting them in Revenge of the Sith, when he's fighting Anakin and Obi-Wan, he is going out of his effing way not to kill them.
Yeah, because he could have.
Yeah. he knows this guy is, Palpatine is in fact Sidious. He knows this. And he still thinks I can get Sidious if I just get a couple of people to back me on this.
Mm-hmm.
You watch it throughout the entirety of Clone Wars. He with Ventress, with General Grievous, he's trying to build somebody that can help him take Sidious out, because he knows Sidious is too powerful to go up against one-on-one. Very few people can handle that. Yoda couldn't do it. In Yoda, for all that Dooku disagreed with him, he recognized that Yoda was very powerful. I'm not going to talk about midichlorians, but we get into this whole thing where you see the moment where he hears him going, "Do it," and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to die. He set me up." And Anakin, when Anakin kills Dooku, he starts the final fall of the character. Like he's been really damaged by the war. And you see that especially if you watch the Clone Wars. Anakin has been very damaged by the war. Anakin was actually the closest to closest to Mace Windu of anybody other than Mace Windu, where he was very similar in that he studied a lot of combat styles. He studied war. He gets appointed general because like a bunch of them do. That's not, it's not unusual to him, but he was the one that the troops loved fighting for the most.
Because he understood how to preserve their lives.
Yeah, he knew these are my soldiers. They come first. And so he had to make decisions that are technically kind of dark side.
Yeah, now all this is to say, to tie this back in, this is talking about the rigidity, right? Like, and this is the same. Yes,
absolutely. Yoda being so rigid, Yoda not being able to be flexible. The Kirin Tor are all over that.
Yeah, like the Council of Six, they're very much this, right? They're very much, they're gatekeeping. They're very much guarding. Yeah. They're very much trying to keep everybody on this the very strict path.
Antonidas is a perfect example. Not that he's not a good wizard. Not that he wasn't, a kind person.
Just look at his interactions with Jaina.
Yeah.
Right?
Like he's constantly telling her, no, slow down, don't do that. It's like the guy's just no, no, no. And what ends up happening? He doesn't listen to Medivh. He doesn't even recognize Medivh. And I'm sorry, Antonidas, you're the head of the Council of Six. When Medivh shows up, you should know who he is.
Yeah.
He's not trying to hide it. Yeah, sure, he showed up as a bird, but
I mean, it's all of this is very much parallels of what a rigid rule system, a rigid structure can do. And again, the Kirin Tor didn't, and I'm not saying all of them did, because I'm sure there were ones that understood that the city was made of the people that live there. But again, when you're so reliant on that magic as a tool, everything becomes a magic problem. And this idea of, and like looking at in-game distances are a lot closer than they are in the world as the fantasy and as the story unfolds, right? Going to Crystal Song Forest and teleporting Dalaran there after rebuilding it, that's one thing. And it's not necessarily as close as you would expect to, the Ice-Crown Citadel as it actually appears in game, but it's still too close. You're still going into unknown territory. You're going to a place that has not been explored by essentially the Alliance in, at least a generation at this point, because Arthas has, fallen, gone there, become the Lich King, and has been sitting there doing his thing. You don't know what you're getting into. You don't know what the presence is there. And it's a really monumentally dumb idea. It's amazing that a Frostworm army didn't just siege Dalaran. I am still surprised that did not happen. I
think the only reason it didn't happen was because Arthas was letting them fight the Blue Dragons.
Yeah, maybe.
And keep in mind that the Blue Dragons did attack the place.
They did. They absolutely did.
So I think it was very much a case of Arthas just letting the Blue Dragonflight go. He let them attack the dragon, the Dragonflight Temple. He didn't, during the time that Malagos was losing his marbles again, Arthas, you'll notice Arthas does nothing to interfere with him.
Because he didn't have to.
No, why? It's good for him. If Malagos manages to beat all these dragons, Lots of dead dragons for me to make use of. If Malagos gets beaten, well, he's distracted them while I did my own thing. But you're totally right in that they parked it. Like look at where it was and where you've parked it near. Just a little bit over there is Zuldrak,
Mm-hmm.
where there's you've got like trolls who kill their own gods, and also
I was literally just gonna say like that the city doesn't have defenses besides magic. You think trolls aren't gonna love getting in through the sewers?
yeah, absolutely. They're going to fly up, come in through the sewers, and these guys are fanatics who have access to people who have drained the life out of Loa and are
Mm-hmm.
using that power.
Mm-hmm.
We saw in Zolaman how effective that is, and they're doing it better. So you got that. Then if you go straight up from there, you hit the Storm Peaks, and you've got Loken and all his massive Vrykul army. Are you going to fight all those guys? All those, Iron Dwarves and Iron Vrykul? You're going to fight them? Okay. Then you go like up to the, one thing over from there, the actual glacier. Not only does the Lich King have a giant, his own hat as a building right there, they've also got tons of dead Nerubians, infusing the place. Speaking of that, there's tons of dead Nerubians also infusing this place where we've parked our city and one zone down from it. And then, of course, the Blue Dragonflight. And why did we bring the city again? Like, can you name one reason why you couldn't have just left it in the crater?
Yeah, see, and that's the thing that
Like,
I never understood. Like, and I think this smacks to the hubris of it because they're like, this is a battleship. And it's like, no, it's a city. And you're literally capable
you're
of
literally, yeah.
you're capable of moving armies by teleportation because at this time, like, and this is close enough to Warcraft 3 that like in Warcraft 3 Antonidas had mass teleport, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even we get access to it as a guild perk in game at some point, which is a callback to a mage being able to teleport an army from point A to point B. The archmages can teleport armies from point A to point B. They have this capability.
Well, plus,
And even
yeah,
then
you can open portals. Just open a portal and walk through it.
yeah.
Walk all these people through the portal. Even if you don't want to use mass teleport,
And
just open a portal
into places where they had already established defensible points. Both the Horde and the Alliance had both established beachheads and fortified them. Like, you could have magically fortified those on top of the physical defenses and brought everything in through there and not teleported a whole dang city there. And it just, again, it smacks of that hubris. Now, to go back to, pull it back to current day, because I don't want to spend too much time here. There is, again, some of that parallel in decision making with the, and we'll talk about the decision not to rebuild Dalaran.
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right. Actually, I wished I had said that myself when you said it, because the whole deal with Luke trying to reestablish the Jedi Order was he wasn't trying to reestablish the pre-war Jedi Order.
He was trying
because
to make
that
it new.
fell. Yeah, that didn't work. We aren't soldiers. I don't want us to try and be soldiers again. He wanted to go back and relearn all the stuff that they lost. Keep in mind, with the loss of the Jedi Temple,
all the holocrons
is the loss of all the holocrons. All that knowledge is gone. All that stuff that
or
the
at least
Jedi
scattered.
Order, yeah, Jedi Order accumulated all of it and then ignored most of it.
I mean, it sounds like the Kirin Tor to me.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very similar. I think that's very much what we're seeing here. First off, Khadgar has essentially become the guy who keeps Dalaran going.
Yeah, he's the guardian now at this point. Let's be honest.
And he can't do it anymore. He cannot always be the one running the show.
He's officially
he's old. He's hurt.
Yeah, he's actually an old man now.
Yeah, he's finally lived long enough that his apparent age is his actual age. He looks like what he is, and like I said before, they weren't keeping track of their own membership to the point where Xal'atath could pretend to be a dead guy, and nobody knew. Like, I think Illyria looked at him kind of squinty, going, "Wait a minute." Meanwhile, players were like, "Wait a second, that dude's dead. Why is there a dead guy there? How come this is?" And to the point where I guess only in a way Blizzard actually got away with it because we thought it was a continuity error.
Yeah.
Yeah, and didn't realize it was actually a big sign. Like he's holding up a sign going, "I'm a plot point, but you're not going to see it."
Mm-hmm.
that's a big indictment of the Kirin Tor. What they did to Jaina is a big indictment of the Kirin
Yeah,
Tor.
well, I mean, look at the whole again that whole thing with the Kirin Tor essentially ostracizing her and her establishing her own city,
Yeah.
her own version of what the Kirin Tor was supposed to be in Theramore, right? Like that
Mhm.
didn't work out great, but it drove her away. Probably one of the heftiest magical talents of our time.
Yeah, like number 2 on the wizard thing behind Ashara.
Yeah, easily, and that's saying something. So
Yeah,
like,
because Ashara is ridiculously powerful.
but we come back to the decision of not rebuilding the city, and yes, there's an element of Kagar just being old and not really able to do it anymore. But there's also this realization and a parallel with the Blue Dragon flight that is they went through much the same thing and are rediscovering themselves. And they had
Mhm.
splintered and gone all these different places and were only brought together back during Dragonflight, and even then reluctantly so, and are
Yeah.
rediscovering who they are under the new banner under Caligos, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's interesting that Caligos doesn't become the figure who can unite them until that point. Nothing, the whole deal with, going through the Nexus and getting yourself, the magical confluence, that didn't get the Blue Dragonflight to come together. It was talking to Sindragosa's reflection, to
yep,
that bit of Sindragosa that had all of her memories and experiences. It was connecting with their past and doing it. You're not doing it all the same way. He didn't go connect with their past, look and go, yeah, we're just going to do this. No, he looked at it and said, okay, these are the mistakes we made, and we are going to learn from them.
yeah, and
Um,
even he like he opened the archives, like he
mhm.
allowed non-dragons in there to study the archives, like he made decisions that the Blue Dragon flight previously would not, and that sort of opened it up. And Kagar's in that same position, right? Because
Yeah,
like,
Kagar even says, doesn't he? Don't he and Jaina, when they're talking, doesn't he even say something like, we have lost our way?
yes, exactly the words he says. We have lost our way. We have lost who we were and what we were. And it's a very powerful moment because it's a very real moment and it's a very true moment, and it's something a lot of people have been talking about for years, honestly, since Wrath of the Lich King. And like,
Hmm.
the militarization of the Kirin Tor makes sense in the context of what happened, the rise of Ronin, the rebuilding of Dalaran, Ronin doing his thing makes sense. But
Rhonin was always belligerent. You have to
he
remember that too. When
yes,
Rhonin was in charge of the Kirin Tor, they put a guy who was a war mage in charge. And
yes,
what did he do?
made
He
war.
he yeah, he's I fight things. You want me in charge? Well, I'm going to fight things then.
Yeah. I will go ahead and say the other thing is like the realization that Kygar has is that the Kirin Tor needs to live and breathe and exist in the world, because one of the things that he mentions is that sort of isolation. And I felt very vindicated during that time in that speech and that decision making when essentially Kagar paraphrases something that I've been screaming about on this podcast for years, which is, why aren't we making better decisions and like sitting back and looking at the damage we've done? And instead, we're just going from crisis to crisis, never forcing ourselves to have time to reflect. And Kagar says very much the same thing. Like him being in the chair, him being essentially trapped his energies in the heart and then being spit out and put into a chair that was made out of a magical construct made by somebody who he's sweet on. Uh, you know, he starts really, yeah, I haven't made room for love. I haven't lived. I haven't done all this stuff. I've just been moving from crisis to crisis, as have we all. And we don't get to study things that are our passion. And how many problems could we solve if we just go and do our thing? Do you think the mages could figure out what to do with that giant dang sword that's sitting in Azeroth, or at least help with that? If the ones that specialize in healing magic or earth magic or different aspects of arcane energies that intertwine with that would be allowed to go and, instead of waging war, study it more. Or, mages getting to explore other cultures and other lands. You can't tell me that letting like the mages aren't going to show up in the Arathi Empire. They're not going to reach out and try to explore what happened there, because I'm damn sure they will. And now they're going to have that opportunity. And so the decision not to rebuild Dalaran, or at least not rebuild it as the Dalaran that it was, and leaving it to the regular people to figure out what to do, is the best decision that the Kirin Tor have ever made, because it forces them to evaluate who they were, who they are, who they want to be, and reconnect with their past and move forward in a way that is more integrated with the world and less isolationist. And it's a very powerful moment, and it mirrors, like you pointed out, Matt, what Luke tried to do after winning the war, after trying to reestablish the Jedi Order, was looking at it and saying, what mistakes did we make? Let's move away from them. And
yeah, and in a lot of ways, the biggest problem he had was that he didn't have the time because so much else was still happening. For the Kirin Tor, that could be their problem too, because stuff ain't stopping. But I do think it's interesting to think about the idea of a Kirin Tor that is less of a, we're not an army, we're a think tank. You have a problem, bring it to us and we will figure out how to solve it, but we're not going to be the ones doing that. That's not our job. If they were to understand that it wasn't their job to actually be the ones to go, certain ones could, sure, but as a people, you don't bring everybody to this. Imagine if when the United States went to war, they brought the city around one of their military bases and just floated the thing over. I mean, as it is, aircraft carriers are already like mini cities, but everyone on them is military. It's just not a good idea. And especially because, as you pointed out, not only was it not a fortress, it was a big chunk of rock with its exposed sewers just leaking out wherever it went.
Yep.
It has big hole, and there's nothing. I used to fly in it all the time. There's nothing stopping you. It's not even like a grate over the sewer at any point. They just left it there. And because they're mages, and they weren't thinking of weak points. They weren't thinking strategically or tactically. Those aren't things they learn. That's why Spellbreakers would have been great, guys. If you had some Spellbreakers, the first thing they would have been like is, you seriously have unguarded holes in the basement. Okay. Right off the bat, get rid of the basement. Why is this here? Why are you floating that part? We don't need that part. Stop floating it. Just cut the city off and just float that. In fact, why don't we just leave the whole thing over there? And if you want a really big magical battleship, why don't we build one? We could just have a battleship. Like, at least when the Legion shows up in their big flying things, they're ships.
Yeah.
They're meant for fighting. Even the Scourge understood this. They didn't just show up in anybody's old town. They showed up in a purpose-built fortress. I don't even know, man.
But I think we can call it there. I think that's going to do it. I mean, again, we could have talked about this for more. There's a ton of parallels in the two media because they're very similar organizations in terms of their structure and rigidity. You can keep drawing those parallels all day long. I mean, heck, we even have lightsabers in game, and mages can wield swords. So, it's kind of there. But I do want to thank you. Again, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast sighting community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A ads-free site experience. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send them in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us up on Discord. We have two channels set aside. One is the Q and Podcast Questions channel. It's open to everybody. Same rules apply there. And we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, which we set aside as a place we tend to look there first for our interactions. It's a way of saying thank you to our Patreon subscribers for helping us keep the lights on. Friends, we thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.